What happened to Ben again?
Professor, we are live.
Hello, viewers. Welcome to KDL TV today, this wonderful Sunday afternoon. We are continuing our conversation from where we left last time. We are talking about mental health and coping strategies. Today, we are going to move further and be more specific in our discussion, and we'll be focusing on African immigrants in the United States. In doing so, we are very privileged today to have some of the wonderful, wonderful ladies in our community who are very knowledgeable with this subject and who are going to help us through what we're hoping to be a very intriguing and quite productive conversation. So very honored again to welcome back to the show. Dr. JUDY WANYAMA was here last time we had a conversation. And for our newer viewers here, JUDY is a nurse practitioner. She practices here in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She's also a long-time educator. So she teaches college and understands what it means for young people going through not just the academic process, but also what it means going through the mental health issues that she will also be talking to us in a moment. In addition to that, she's also a community activist. She does contribute a lot to the immigrant community here in the United States. Of course, we're honored to have her again back here. Thank you, JUDY, for joining us. We are also privileged today on the show to have Sally ATEKA. Sally ATEKA, I think for our viewers here in the United States, you know her very well, particularly from the political rallies. Today, we're not focusing on politics. We'll be talking about mental health and many other issues. As you know, Sally is a mother of two wonderful, beautiful daughters. She is a student also. She working very hard to be a family nurse practitioner, and she and JUDY have something in common, which they will be sharing in the course of this process. But more importantly for Sally, she's a firm believer in the science of therapy, and that's really what we need in this discussion. Welcome, Sally. Also honored today from across the Atlantic in London, Southwest London, we welcome Nyareso Mukaya. She's a psychologist, and we're very, very honored. Last time she was on the show, unfortunately, we didn't have. We make that apology to her right here on air, but we're honored to have her again back. In the meantime, just so you know, she's an expert in this area. She's still a graduate student at the King's College, London, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Very interesting, and we're going to obviously enjoy the conversation, just so you know that Nyereso has a lot of followers across the United States. So guys, let's get to the conversation here. Again, as we start this conversation and as the world is viewing this, it's important to recognize that mental health is an issue that we really need to discuss. But quite frankly, is an issue that, particularly within the immigrant community, we are a bit skeptical about this issue. And again, as I said in the introduction last week, we are not necessarily providing solutions, but what we're trying to do here is to start a conversation that we hope will continue and that will help our people heal themselves, and that by extension will become a more productive member of within this Western world. And obviously for those on viewing from the African continent, at least they'll have an understanding of what happens here in the West. Now, the fact that the three ladies are educators, they're well schooled. Let's start with you, Dr. JUDY. So what does research say really about mental health, particularly regarding young people?
So research says there is a lot of issues in terms of connecting. And if we have immigrants, especially who are coming here and they are trying to get accustomed to the culture, that is a big issue. Two, research says that, any kind of stresses are actually things that we need to be on high radar for. So I will just focus on those two. And then I will say here, one, if we have immigrants here and we have people who are trying to focus on, normal life, everything else affects them. So we need to effect the same assessments for immigrants and Americans too, because those same stresses will affect us. So we need to use the same tools. And I go back to the science. So let's use the same tools. Let's make sure we are assessing everybody for, are you stressed? Have you been sleeping the last 2 weeks? Do you feel suicidal? Do you feel homicidal? What else is going on? Are you overeating? So the same applies for everybody, but I think we need to really push for mental health. Like it doesn't choose, and it's okay to ask those questions. So that's my take.
Now I'm even more privileged to have from Ellen. Nyareso, obviously this is what you do for a living. You've gone to school and you're working very hard to this end. You grew up in Kenya, you moved from Kenya, you are in the UK. What does research say about this subject, given that pretty much who we are talking to your age mates?
I'm just going to quote some figures, some global estimates for you. So 20% of children and adolescents suffer from mental illnesses, most commonly anxiety and depression. And in the context of America, and when we're focusing on immigrants, it affects them, the community, meaning it affects them more, and they have less access to, they are exposed to events, they're exposed to more risk factors, so they are at higher risk of developing mental health issues. And there's a 75% lifetime, there's a 75%, there's a 75% lifetime of disorders among people aged 18 to 24. So that's a prime age for people to start developing these lifetime disorders like depression, and so on.
Thank you very much. So, Sally, to you again, just for the viewers, obviously wondering where Laurie is on the technical ground. She might be joining in the course of the conversation, but we have replacement here, Sally. Sally, you work very hard, not just for the community, but also this is what you do in school. What does research say in the same regard?
Perhaps it's very important for us to note what mental health is. Many a times when our community, we hear mental health, we obviously think that, oh, this person is crazy, or this person is cuckoo or gone mad. Mental health is defined as the ability for someone to realize their well-being, to work in the community, to actively involve themselves, to do their daily activities without any interruption. So when we talk about mental health issues, that is the reverse now. That means this person is not able to cope with the stressors, like Dr. Judy said. This person has no ability to work normally. They're not productive even to themselves. They are withdrawn from themselves. They are withdrawn from families. They are withdrawn from what they usually do actively. So Nyareso gave some numbers, and I'm going to add more into that in children, many a times we are stereotyped as a community, especially the African community, the Kenyan community, that children cannot have mental issues. Yes, right from birth, right from conception, children can be stressed, they can be distressed, and this is a long-lasting illness that can affect children because of the sadness and irritability from when a mother conceives and they have a child with stress. They bear the pregnancy with stress. So you give birth to a child who is already exposed to some of the triggers and some of the risk factors, like extreme high mood, highs and lows, excessive fear, worry, anger, anxiety, and some of it is seen in high school kids when they withdraw from the other group. And this causes some dramatic changes in eating, even sleeping habits. So as immigrants, when we do screening or when we are doing assessment, as Dr. Judy mentioned, we need to be very cautious of their background, especially. We need to focus on what ways can we screen them, because the numbers are now increasing. If you look at what circumstances we are living right now with the coronavirus, which is also called COVID-19, um, the people who are stressed more are, in as much as we say the older generation is stressed, the young adults and children are stressed because some of the things they may not understand, they may not comprehend why all of a sudden life changed dramatically in their life, and what steps are they taking to alleviate those changes that we are seeing. Back to you, Dr. Okari.
Oh, thank you, Sally. That's very insightful. Thank you for coming on. I already appreciate your contribution from the word go. Judy, I want to come to you in a moment, and we've had these conversations before and private conversations. Quite frankly, it's not a subject that we can afford to take lightly. It is a very serious subject that we really should pay very, very close attention to. And in part because when you're talking about the African immigrant community, the children pretty much rely on what parents really want them to be. And I think that's where we missed a point. Based on your experience as a nurse practitioner, as an educator, and obviously you growing up and having kids, what are the most important points that parents, particularly adults, should know about the young people? Because I think part of the problem is that we probably, including myself, we probably lack a good understanding of the key areas that could be detrimental to the children.
Talk about three. One, communication. I think we're lack in that, or we're not doing enough as immigrant parents. I mean, we have three types of parenting styles, and everybody wants to be authoritarian. And authoritarian doesn't work for our kids because they have a different kind of approach in terms of, they have all these freedoms. So I'd say we need to really review what is our parenting style, because if my dad was authoritarian, then that's what I want to push down on my kids. But does that work? No. I think for us, we have to be understanding. So there's a generational gap. And
It's okay, Judy. Keep on. We understand.
yeah, okay. So those are some of the things that I look at, like parenting styles, and then support, like community support. I mean, who do you have on your corner? When I say who do you have on your corner, you should be able to call a friend and just say, hey, you know what, I'm struggling with a friend, or I'm struggling with a child who's going through this. We don't have that, and that's why I've really been pushing for, do we have a safe house? Because for us, when you brought up in this authoritarian community, you know what happens? You say, hey, it's the highway or nothing. But is that it? We have to be accommodating, and we have to understand that these kids have options. Peer pressure is also another very big issue. And I've seen, I talk to parents, I talk to the young kids, they're my patients, and I ask them, who matters the most? And they say, my friend really influences what I have to do. So that means peer pressure, and we need to tap onto that, because here, if we are not giving these kids an opportunity to express and just be themselves, they are going to seek out appreciation, and especially with their, peer pressure, their peer friends. And, there's so much going on. So I think for us, or for parents who are trying to raise kids here, we need to understand all these things and just make sure that we address them. And we don't have to address them in an aggressive manner. So meaning we're not going to be the authoritarian parent, like, you know what, the highway or nothing. We are going to be, what can I do? How can I help? Because that's how we know what they're doing, what's going on with them.
Good. Thank you. I'm going to bring back. Thanks, Judy. The young ones are part of the conversation. That's okay. They'll make a contribution as we go through. So, Nyareso, I'm going to bring you again here. You're younger, you're a young person, and I think you have good experience, real life experience, and obviously as an expert in this area. I think the African mentality generally is, how do you do in school is pretty much the gauge for a good kid. And I think any person will tell you, my kid is doing very good in school, and therefore my child is okay. So if you bring up the idea that there's much more than that, as Sally said moments ago, people might say, no, look, my child is not cuckoo, is not all this kind of stuff. So from your experience, what other important factors should people, especially parents, know about younger people beyond education?
You're right. Education is used as a measure to gauge how well your child is doing. And that's an important factor for mental health. But it's beyond that. It's broader than that. We need to consider all the economic determinants that factor mental health. We're talking about poverty. We're talking about ethnicity. We're talking about your coping strategies. We're talking about so many things. It's so broad, we can't limit ourselves to one. So I would say social determinants for one. For parents and for fellow youth, you need to consider the risk factors. What can cause mental health in your friends? What can contribute to poor mental health? What can contribute to good mental health? So do they have support systems? Do they have the right information about mental health? Do they understand the causes of mental health? Again, how there is an overemphasis on education, and that's a very simplistic view. We need to bring that view and look at what else affects us personally, how we feel, our well-being. Sally mentioned earlier, COVID-19 has brought about a lot of distress among youth, which is very true. Transitional periods can cause a lot of anxiety, can cause depression even. And when I talk about transitionary periods, I'm talking about you're a recent graduate and now we are in a situation where you're not really sure what the next steps are, and that can cause stress, it can cause anxiety. So it's those little nuances that we need to pay attention to, and everything contributes to your well-being. Just the same way we talk about physical health and we talk about being fit, and we talk about taking care of ourselves and having sleep and doing this and that. It's the same thing with mental health. Anything can affect your mental health. It's not just one thing. We shouldn't just focus on one thing. Another thing for parents especially to take note is how mental health manifests physically. So the physical symptoms, because those are usually ignored. It was mentioned earlier in this conversation that people with mental health issues are referred to as being mad. So people are waiting for something extreme to happen. It can be as small as your child is being in too much, or they aren't sleeping enough, or they're a bit unkempt lately, they're not taking care of themselves. And those are factors that we need to pay attention to as friends, as peers, and as parents.
There's an excellent contribution there. So I'm going to bring Sally back in a moment here. Sally, I think we're in the midst of a situation here. We're talking about the older generation, myself and others, the parents, and then we have the younger generation, Nyareso and others. So there's that gap The question perhaps for us, and I'm sure after the conference, after the call, you will have a conference for the youth here in Minneapolis, and you work a lot on this subject. How then do we get the young people involved, particularly for them to talk more openly about mental health issues? Because I think, given the authoritarian view that we, the African immigrants, have, sometimes we make it difficult for our children to share that with us. What do we do going forward so that they're able to share their experiences?
I'll go back to what Nyareso said. I'm gonna add more into that. To be honest, as African parent, I'm a parent, and many a times we focus on the physical well-being of the children as they develop. We forget that during the developmental stages of a child, there is social, emotional, their mental well-being, and psychological, and also academic well-being. So as a parent, I'm more focused: are they eating well? Do they have a roof over their head? Do they have clothing? And I forget that there's other aspect of development that I need to work on for my children or the children that I serve in the community. So as a parent, I think that the best thing to do is to develop a conscientiousness, that getting in touch, or training the children to be open to us, to be more open to discussing what is hurting them or what is affecting them. It may be very small things that we need to look at. The red flags in children, they may come to you in the evening and say, "Hey, mom, today so and so stepped on I stepped on so and so's feet, and I said sorry," but they said, "I don't care about you, or I don't want you anyway. I don't like how you look like." Right there, the child would withdraw and start feeling, "Oh, I don't have the same skin color as this other one." So they will start feeling, "I don't want to go back to school. I don't want to tell mom or dad because they will feel bad that I don't want to be at school." So those are some of the things that we need to develop, and we need to be intentional. We need to start developing an open conversation, open communication, as Dr. Judy said, with our, children. If not so, they have friends. If we befriend some of those friends, then we are able to know what is going on in their circle. They have peers that we can get access to, during this time as they grow and as they develop. One thing that we have taught our children is to be strong. We, as African children, we are telling them, "Hey, you are a boy, you can do this, you grow up, develop." I mean, it's as if we're telling them to develop very quick and skip those growth spurts and ignore the mental issues that are going on. We are teaching them to be resilient and avoid going through that gap or age gap or whatever stresses that they are going through. As parents, we need to avoid that and listen to the unseen signs or unmentioned body, signals that the children have. Thank you.
Thank you very kindly. Wow, that's interesting, very educative. I'm going to come back to you. We're trying to get back Judy on because of technical problems. We're going to get her back. But I want to come back to you, Nyereso. And we had this conversation last week privately, and we were talking about this. And as we were talking, I thought of my very good friend who, less than a month ago, lost his very dear daughter, a very young, beautiful, extremely smart girl. Just took her life, and my friend has not recovered from that. And quite frankly, myself, I've not recovered from the fact that she decided to end her life. And one of the conversations I had with my friend is the lack of understanding, the fact that the father takes the girl to school, but she decides to take her life. So from your end, I want you to look straight to the camera. Talk to me on behalf of many parents across this country, across the U.S., across Europe, and in Africa. What should we do to make sure that the youth are more comfortable sharing their experiences, just as Sally mentioned moments ago?
mean, she mentioned some very important points. I'm just going to expand on them. One is being supportive and being open to listening to what your children say. But it doesn't just stop there. If we are taking an interest in mental health as adults, we understand mental health for what it is and not for what we have been told over and over and over again, which is that it is a myth, it's not real. So if we already have those ideas in our minds that it's not real, it doesn't exist, then we are more likely to view mental health when our children tell us about it or when our parents tell us about it, we're more likely to view it as an attention-seeking strategy. And that is more detrimental to the person's mental health than it is helping them, you know? So I would say being more open to hearing what they have to say, and also just taking the initiative to educate us as parents on what it is mental health is. And as I mentioned before, what are the factors for mental health? It could be as or as small as, you know, being in an environment where you're a minority and you feel out of place. That gives you anxiety, and that can contribute to poor mental health. So one would be allowing that conversation to happen, being open, being understanding, supportive. And even when your children talk about it, if you have a view that differs from them, it's good to be an active listener, just as Sally said. It's good to sit and listen to what they have to say. You don't necessarily have to agree with it. I know, you know, culture is deep rooted and it's hard to change, but just that active listening is important. Judith mentioned peer pressure earlier, and I think that's a very, very important thing to note, because the people that your children surround themselves with can contribute to them being well or being unwell, you know? And that's a huge indication of your child's well-being as well. If they're hanging around the wrong crowd, there might be issues. So we need to pay attention to that, and we need to have free-flowing conversation between parents and children, between us and our peers, between, you know, even the people in the community who take care of your children when you're not around, teachers, pastors. And as we all are from African backgrounds, we know how important religious, traditional figures are, community leaders. These people as well need to be able to allow that space for people to communicate how they are feeling.
But I'm going to stick with you for a moment here, Nyareso. So from a prior conversation, I want to have your take. Thanks to technology, we're able to connect with you in London, and most of our viewers as well in Africa are watching this. So we cannot continue the conversation without recognizing the fact that social media has a major impact on how we behave. Obviously, when you talk about the older generation, what I call the digital immigrants, we as parents don't have much access to the social media platforms, or quite frankly, do not care much about it. But your peers and younger, you're very present in the social media, and that's what we're calling digital natives. Talk about that. How should we use social media, particularly younger people? How should they use social media so that they're not mentally disturbed? And what do you say to the parents in regards to how they should manage their children's social media accounts?
I will say this: social media is a vice, and it is also a good platform for advocacy. When I talk about it being a vice, there's a lot of information out there that can contribute to poor mental health, you know? There might be comparing your life to others, and that puts you down, and you're depressed, and you're this. Particularly if you are on social media, this is just an example, hypothetically. You're from a poor background, you're seeing all these things about, you know, the people with their materialistic things that can affect you. That can affect your mental health. Conversely, you have all these self-help apps. You have all this information about mental health. You have all these platforms people have put out that can help you manage your stress, that can help you manage whatever you're going through at that particular time. In terms of parents and how manage their social media, I'm not adept to speak on that. I'm going to leave that for Sally to answer. But in terms of youth, I think if you are having mental health issues, I think the first step one is to understand that there are self-help apps out there. You can get on, I know many people know about meditative apps. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. It's the step before you actually seek help from a facility. You can help yourself online. And if you know that you are prone to having poor mental health or mental health challenges or anxiety and all this, then it's best to understand what triggers that and avoid, consuming that information.
Okay, thank you. So, Sally, to you, your thoughts in the same regard.
All right. Thank you so much, Nyareso, for that point and input about social, about the gadgets that we have. It's very true that it's hard to control what kids watch or look or see when it comes to the social media. Speaking from a Christian perspective, in church, a few years ago, we were being always told, leave your phones away, put your phones away, carry the Bible, and some people applauded a lot of, when you're at church, you have your Bible in the phone. And so the minister or the pastor of the church would say, we have a Bible, and for sure that's true. It's very true. We have a Bible, and avoid the phones because the phones were tempting, the congregation, because you are drawn into the phone all the time to look at Facebook, Instagram. Now the kids have TikTok. I don't know what TikTok is, but they have introduced me to that, and with a lot of these platforms in social media, now we have found out that social media is very important because it has unveiled some of the dark sides of society. I'm not going into that part because that is purely political and what social media has done on that part, because it has brought into light a lot of things that were dark, a lot of things that we could not even see, how people are treated in front of the people who are supposed to protect us, who are the police or in the cells or in jail. Now that aside, let's talk about social media with children. It's very difficult to control what children are seeing, watching, or how they're interacting with their friends. If you see keenly now, the children have a way of attaching the games they play on the TV, on the computer, on their gadgets with their friends somewhere else. They have accounts that they have, and they can play the games. Of course, that is keeping them busy. Of course, we are using the gadgets to do homework. Of course, we are using the gadgets to do other important activities like socializing. We are told to keep away from physical distancing, but continue with social distancing. We may not gather, but we can do online gatherings, which is important, like right now what we are doing, and people will view and see this. But as parents, let me go back to the point. As parents, we have to be intentional to the subjects that we are exposing our children. We may not control everything, but if we discuss openly with the children, and some children, we may hide them some of these things, but they know a lot. You would think that a 9, 10-year-old doesn't know all the kind of things that they're exposed to, pornography and all this. They see it on TV, they see it on even the cartoons. So as parents, when we are introducing them or when we are controlling, even when we are putting the passwords to the to the computers passwords, to the TV passwords, to all the gadgets. We have to be intentional on which subjects we want them to listen. One thing that we have to be careful is the interaction. How are they interacting with their fellow friends? What are they, what are they talking? What are they discussing? How are we involved in their life? How are we involved in their personal lives? As parents, we are taught to use personal touch. Be in the life of this child and create a stable relationship between you and the child. Make sure you have a safe environment. This will help boost the self-esteem, like Nyareso said. It will help boost the self-esteem, and the quality of the child will change. And in turn, this child will infect the other child. You've had a common saying that during coronavirus, if you are not infected, you are affected in one way or another. Another very important aspect in children, we need to include play. Play is very important in children's development. It doesn't matter how old they are. As mature or old as I am, play is very important because it elicits a chemical in your child or in the mind. And it's a part of exercise. It's called a part of exercise. Bring games. Show them some of the board games. My child was telling me, Mommy, we need to buy board games. The teacher said, buy board games so that can help the child keep the mind of the child away from, a lot of social media, a lot of TikTok, a lot of watching, because the mind will be drawn into watching something when they are bored. Children nowadays, they tell me, I'm bored. Find some of the activities. Take a walk. Go bike. These are some of the things as parents we may approach. And let us be very intentional on how we do it. Thank you very much.
We work on the technical part to get Dr. Judy back on. I want to come back to you, Nyereso, on the social media aspect of it. Talk to me. Should I stalk my children's social media accounts? Or if they send a request on my Twitter or Facebook, should I accept that? Or what is your take on this? Talk on behalf of the younger people.
It's good you've mentioned, as we were talking about it earlier, and I mentioned how it's so important to have that space for your children to talk to you, to open up to you. Within reason. I mean, I'm a different. I don't know if I'm a different generation from the children who are there today, but I have a lot of peers who have a very open relationship with their parents, that they're able to even discuss their social media. They're able to open up about what they do, who they follow, what they're doing on their social media. So having that openness between a parent and a child is very important. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that because of the times that we're in, we have to move with the times. And right now, social media is proving to be a great platform, not only for the age of information, but also for the seeking of services. And when I talk about that, I mean like digital interventions. Like I mentioned earlier about self and all this. So as a parent, it's not when we talk about learning about mental health, these are some of the things that you need to know. These are some of the things that you need to be able to explain to your child. If you don't really want to go see somebody in person, you don't want to talk to somebody, maybe you can download the. And Sally mentioned TikTok. I think that is a good and a bad thing in a way. It's bittersweet because if you're on TikTok because you're bored, you're spending hours on end on it, maybe not so productive. But that could also be an outlet for children to release certain energy. So if they're stressed, they go on there and they dance and they do a little show and it helps them feel better. So yeah, my point basically was, as parents, you need to move with the time, adapt with what society is putting forth for us to do.
Very good, thank you. So, to our viewers who are the parents, just make sure that you accept those requests from your kids and try to log into their accounts. You're not stalking, according to a psychologist expert there in London. So, I'm gonna see if I'm not sure. We have Dr. Judy back on. That's okay. If not, Sally, to one of you, we are talking about mental health, the symptoms, and all these discussions in general terms. And I did mention before, one of the potential outcomes of mental illness could be a situation where the younger people take their lives, and that has been proven to be so. And in part, I think, depending on who your friends are, for those ones we've lost in the last few years or so, there is evidence on the social media that these people were really, really mentally challenged before their lives ended, including the cases that now we've had in the last few weeks in the U.S. We have cases in Dallas, and the other case in North Carolina, where men ended up killing their spouses. Their social media accounts, you could easily tell that they really foresaw this coming. But just to our viewers, what are some of the potential impacts on children, very specifically for viewers? Sally?
For children, some of the things that we see in children is when they are mostly they are having poor performance at school. That is a big red flag that parents and teachers needs to communicate, and their caregivers too, that there's something going wrong with this child. They all of a sudden they've started performing very poorly. Is there an assessment that we need to do? Is there something that we need to look at? What is causing this? Another thing that we need to look at is boredom, persistent boredom. The child is just bored. They're just there. And sometimes they may complain of vague symptoms. They may say, I'm having some vague physical symptoms. They may say, I'm having a headache, I'm having a stomachache. All of a sudden, they're complaining of some symptoms that, they are not having usually. Another issue that Nyareso has mentioned is sleeping. They're either sleeping too much or not sleeping at all, or they're having restlessness. A child just come home, or a teenager or a young adult, they're just restless. They're not settled. You would see them, not focusing. Their concentration is, very low, and some of them will have poor appetite or will overeat, and they may complain of nightmares. They may complain of, nobody likes me. They may, start being by themselves, general withdrawal from the rest of the group of family members. And they may not talk about it. And now what we have seen, a major aspect that we have seen, when someone is depressed and they're suicidal, we will see a big red flag. They will communicate. When they have reached at the point that they want to commit suicide, many of them, studies have shown that 1 in 10 of them, actually not even 1 in 10 of them, 1 in 3 will communicate. And where do they communicate? They do not pick a phone and call you and say that, I'm going to commit suicide. They will write. Now they have a platform, they have a way. They may text, they may say, I don't see myself making it anymore. I'm tired of life. They may write it on Facebook. They will show you. A few of them will call, but 1 in 3 will write it. So it's up to us when we receive this message, when we see it on Facebook, when we see it on Instagram, when we see it on any of the WhatsApp medias, it's up to us to follow up and just let them know that it's not their mistake, because we should not condemn them. Many of us from an African background, we will condemn them, and this is how we will go. Kwenda huko, wacha ujinga. Kwani anataka kujua kwa nini? No, it's up to us to see that, this is something very concerning, to listen with love, to listen carefully, to discipline. We need to discipline these children carefully and with love. Listen intentionally and ask what is going on. And we need to give a clinical approach, like my sister said, Nereso said, we need to give this a clinical approach. I've experienced that before. It's very important for us to know that we can get treatment, we can get psychotherapy, we can get psychologists, we can get medication, and there are some conditions that when a child has reached to a point that they want to commit suicide, they need medication. Why? Because there's a chemical imbalance in them. Like there's a serotonin. There's the chemicals that are telling them that you'd rather be dead than alive.
Okay, interesting. I think we're frozen as I'm going to get back, Judy, to you. Sorry for the technical hiccup that we're experiencing here. And I think the conversation we've had, you listen to
Yeah.
Sally talk. It's okay. It's okay. Our viewers will understand. It's a COVID-19. The kids are home. They're playing. It's understandable. Don't feel bad about it. Now we've talked about this at the introduction. It's okay.
No, but yeah.
Okay,
But,
so
I mhm.
go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead,
No,
Judy.
I love that. I love it. I love this conversation because, for one, I think we think, mental health is, it should be, people should be in some facility, but they should not be. I think we don't understand that, for one, it's an imbalance. Really do help, and psychotherapy does help. For Sally, like we have talked extensively, and even for Lori, when she gets a chance to come in, I really want to tell people that it's okay. It's okay to understand these chemicals are real. Sometimes we might not be able to measure like how much we have of chemical, or like the serotonin, other neurotransmitters. Just the way, if somebody told you there's a snake in the backyard and you have to run, you will run. So we don't understand that, and I wish we did. We have a lot of opportunities to just say, hey, what else is going on? But I'm going to go back to Sally's point. It's okay to listen. And these tools don't just apply to other people, they apply to us too. Because these chemicals are not meant for anybody else. I mean, they're meant for a community, or like this is I can use a PHQ-9, or I can use like an anxiety screening tool for anybody because it applies. And I'm gonna go back to you, the moderator. I'm gonna ask you, how many times like so stressed? How many times do you feel like you can't handle daily life? How many of them, like, I can't sleep? And those are some of the questions that I want us to ask ourselves and just say, it's okay for me to have these issues, but we have to be okay with them.
Oh, thank you, Judy. Now we have you on screen. Okay, as we finish this, good point again. I want to bring you back, Nyareso, to the same point and add on to what is it. The truth of the matter is, and next week, same time, we're going to have a discussion, men talk, on this show, talking about this. As a man, I think a fairly educated man, experienced, have children, been in the country for a very long time. One thing I'll say on record is that mental illness is an issue. Have I been depressed? Oh, yes, many times, right? Have I taken time to do a lot of self reflection? Oh, yes, a lot. Have I spent a lot of time digging into deep literature to have a good understanding of this? Oh, yes, a lot of time. Have I had conversations with men, women, children talking about mental health, my own students? A lot of time. And that's why it's very important that we talk about this. Nyaresa, I want to come back to you as we run down the clock. We've been talking about this on a more individualistic basis. And quite frankly, as a community, we sometimes tend to be judgmental. I think, as you alluded in the intro there, Sally, and as well, Dr. Judy, we seem to be judgmental. If my child is doing okay in school, then the assumption is my child is okay. If my neighbor's child is having issues, then we'll say the neighbor's child is cuckoo, is crazy, and stuff like that. But I think at this level, Nyeresa, you'll agree with me, and other panelists probably, we should be a step higher than that. We have a lot more to do as a community. We should not be castigating or talking down on other children, because as a community, when one of us goes down, pretty much it does affect us as a community, correct?
Yes, it does. And I think that boils down to our own beliefs as a community, because those carry so much weight in comparison to individual beliefs. You've just mentioned that you are a male, you're African, you understand mental health, you've taken the time to understand that. That is a personal level. But if we want to appeal to the community and get them more involved in mental health, we need to communicate it in a way that is acceptable for that community. I can't stress that enough, right? I'll give you an example. We talk about treatments and all of this help for mental health. And as an it is very important for us to know who we are giving the information to and how we can tailor it in a way that is acceptable. And who is providing this? Is it a source, or is it somebody who is going to be discredited as, because most Africans think that mental health is a Western concept. They don't believe it. And even in other countries, even in the US, as an immigrant, you still carry those beliefs with you. So who is educating you about mental health? Is it somebody that you trust? Is it somebody, is it somebody who is relaying information in an acceptable way, not only to you, but to the community? Because that is very important. You can have somebody come and speak up and nobody accepts what they've said at the end of it, because at the end of the day, they're not a trusted source. They're not a reliable, they're not a source that the community of faith and backing in. So we really need to pay attention to how acceptable and how acceptable what we are saying is. And if we come across instances where we are recognizing that there's a problem in communication, that people aren't really accepting what we're saying because it's directly lifted from research or it's directly lifted from one culture to another, then we need to find ways to adapt this so that it's culturally acceptable.
Very good. Thank you. Excellent. That's very academic. No, Sally, I want to bring you in on this note as well as a community, and I want to be more practical, particularly within the Twin Cities here. When we talk about we are talking about the Kenyan Community Church, where you're very active in. We are talking about different groups within immigrant communities. Just as an example, you take the Amwa group, right? And the Kesa group, for example, the Mukida group. We are saying when one of us has an issue, quite frankly, it is a collective responsibility to come in and try to, as much as possible, help, because the success of any is the success of all of us. And take an example of Nyereso. She pretty much is my daughter. She's our daughter. She's a younger sister. She's in London. But based on our contribution here, quite frankly, they're very insightful that we should be celebrating here. And that should be the case to any of our children within the community. Sally?
Oh, what is your question?
What do you think we should do as a community to make sure that we celebrate our own, help our own if they're down?
All right. Thank you for that question. That's a very important question. Number one, when I think Nyareso mentioned it, that how are we connected in the community? How, the first thing is some of the factors we need to look at. How are we receptive? How do we look? What is our perception towards mental health illnesses? Are we still hanging on to that narrative that mental health is a Western culture condition? That's what we grew up knowing until it hit home here in America, here in Minnesota, when we started having first few cases of mental health issues. And to be honest with you, for us, we knew that mental health was psychological only, the psychological trauma that makes somebody just, get out of the ordinary life and they are in the mental rehab. They are sent to the mental rehab. And some of the symptoms are when they cannot, speak cohesively, you cannot comprehend them, they're saying something else, then we say, hey, so and so is a mental health case, and then they are taken in for treatment. If there are other, signs of mental health or other illnesses that lead to mental health issues like mood disorder, depression, anxiety, excessive stress, bipolar, um, personal disorders, psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. Eating disorder is a mental health issue where, someone overindulges into eating, then all of a sudden they can't do without food, they get into obese, and those are some of other, underlying conditions that mental health can cause. And also there are trauma situations or disorders, which is called PTSD. When you hear someone is traumatically affected, there are some family members or community members who saw very tough, situations in their life. They get depressed, they get into stress, and we assume that, without therapy, without talking to them, without coming into a group to help them get over those trauma, we assume that they will be okay. Let's say, for instance, a child or a young adult who saw their family members get killed or murdered or get slaughtered. That causes trauma in this child. That causes trauma in this family, family member. Another aspect that we need to look at is substance abuse and substance use and abuse. Now, of recent, we've heard that 50% of people incarcerated, those ones who are in jail, who are in cells, who are arrested because of either drunk driving, substance use, they are Africans. They are our Kenyan brothers. I don't have the specific statistics in Minnesota. I stand to be corrected. But a lot, I would say close to 25%, they get arrested because of substance use and abuse. And this is a mental illness. And we assume, that they just started drinking. Something must have triggered them to start, using and abusing substances. So as a community, we have a lot to do. We have a lot of work to do in bringing this home. First of all, explaining to our community members that truly mental health is an issue that needs to be tackled, that needs to be addressed. And then before we start giving them resources, we need to accept them, acknowledge and accept them, that they are going through a condition that can be treated, that can be managed. And then we need to start screening who is at risk. Because we know studies reveal that once a person grows with a mental issue, 50 to 75%, they will grow up as an adult and have the mental issue problem if it is not resolved at an early age or at a young age. So the community members, if we accept if we treat these people with love and care, if we start working on it at a young age, and as parents, we don't know if the children are inheriting some of this because the cause is not known why people are having mental issues. It could be psychological, it could be mental, it could be physiological, it could be inherited. So some of these triggers or some of these risk factors lead into mental health. Another very important thing that we need to do, in as much as we are looking for, we pray about this. I'm a firm believer of, spiritual background. If we pray about this, God will give us a way on how to approach some of these issues because mental health didn't start yesterday. It's even written in the Bible, that there were mental conditions and people had some of these mental issues. The best thing is not to drive them out of the community. Is they live with us, is to accept them and live with them. We live with them in the same household and help them get the treatment that is needed. Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Okai.
Thank you very much. As you prepare for a closing statement, Sally, I want to come to you, Nyereso. I want you to use this forum on KDLTV. Are we on? Are we frozen? Okay, we are frozen. Okay, sorry, there's a technical issue there. I apologize. Nyereso, are you there? So I want to give you a platform here. So if you can hear me, I want to give you a platform here on KDL TV to talk directly. We've been talking about I and talking about the youth. I want you to talk directly to, among others, their parents who are listening right now or who will listen to this conversation after today. They're educators within our communities here in the United States, and I'm sure some of whom are listening in London and others in Kenya. There are many spiritual leaders at the churches that we have across the US. And then obviously we also have community leaders here in the US, and also there are those in the UK. Please use this platform to talk to them directly, tell them what they should know and what we should do going forward so that we build a better generation.
Glad you've given me that list because those are lists of stakeholders, the people who are directly and indirectly affected by mental health issues. You've spoken about community leaders, traditional and spiritual leaders. You've spoken about educators. All these people have a role to play. And I cannot stress this enough that you need to understand to be able to create that space for people to approach you, for people to discuss it with you. Mental health is not something that is only tackled by mental health professionals. We are all resources. And I think that's how people need to start viewing themselves, as resources. You can provide support before somebody gets to the facility level. You as an individual are there to provide that support. And I think a lot of what Sally had said, and from the other question that you mentioned, I can add on to that because it's relevant to this question, is stigma. It needs to be bunked. The beliefs that we have, we need to challenge those beliefs because there's scientific evidence. There's that mental health exists. So now that we know that, we need to read around it and understand it as these stakeholders, as these educators. As if you're a teacher, you need to start looking at how or researching how mental health affects children and adolescents and youth within the education sector. What are the risk factors? What are the protective factors of mental health? How can I, as a resource, help somebody who has mental health issues? And I think that begins with changing your own personal views. It can even begin with something as little as changing the language that you use. And I'm so glad that it was brought up in the beginning, oh, mental health, mental illness, you're cuckoo, you're crazy. Those little things can deflect people from, talking to you, speaking to you, because when you mention that, when you use the wrong language, or, even your non-cues, if you are not seeming receptive to talk about mental health issues, people will not be receptive to talk about them either. So I think it's very important for us to, one, debunk the stigma, so educate ourselves. Two, to change the language that we use. We shouldn't be using such harsh terms like, crazy, cuckoo, this, that, or, when we were talking about suicide, why do you want to kill yourself, da, da, da. Instead of being defensive, we need to be more receptive. We need to be more understanding, be more open to let conversations happen, because that's the only way that we can help people who have mental issues. We've talked about suicide. People do not just happen to commit suicide. It doesn't just happen in one day or in the span of an hour. There's always signs. There's always a way to tell people, seek help. People look for the little things. The little things in the way you communicate with them, in the way that you interact with them. So it's very important for us to abandon what we already know about mental health and start educating ourselves with the information that we have out there on social media, which I've talked about. We need to start moving with the times, read some articles, follow some pages on Facebook. Maybe there's somebody who speaks really well about mental health issues. That's great. Another thing that I think that needs to happen is mental health training at every single level. Because as Africans, we really value traditional and spiritual leaders. So people in the church should have at least some mental health training, some background. Teachers, it's very important for teachers to have mental health training, because at the end of the day, children spend most of their time than they do at home. So the teachers are basically taking care of your children most of the time, and they need to be able to have that knowledge. They need to be able to have those basic skills to be able to identify and refer if they themselves cannot help you. And it's also very important, I think I've said this and I can't stress this enough, that a single person is a resource. It's not rocket science. We don't need to then now train more people in mental health. We don't need to we ourselves need to take the initiative to educate ourselves and use that to then open that forum and that space for people to be able to communicate. Do we have these spaces like for youth with Facebook and WhatsApp? Like, you can have group chats, and that can be a virtual support group. That can be a place where people chime in and they help each other and they text each other, I'm not feeling too good today. And these things are happening. They're happening in South Africa. They're happening as part of other priority.
Okay, I think we have. Okay, go ahead. Can you hear us, Nyereso? We lost you for a minute. But I want to come back to you to make 1 minute closing statement, and I'm going to have Sally conclude here. Sally, next week, same time, we are having a panel of men for what we are calling, and I call the viewers to tune in next week, same time, for Men Talk. And men are going to talk about, these are people who have done a lot of research working hard on this subject. We'll be talking about this. I want you, as you respond to this question, have in mind that they will be responding to your thoughts. One of the challenges, to your point you said moments ago about incarceration, studies show that most of the time, the men or black men who go to jail, pretty much most of them are from broken families. Unfortunately, this is something that is continually being part of and parcel of our community. It's an unfortunate situation to talk about, but at some point in these discussions, we are going to bring this to the light so that we really be very candid about this. What do you say to parents, particularly so that they make sure that they take care of their children, communicate well, as Nyereso said in the introduction, and particularly for men who will be on the show next week? What do we want them to address?
Okay, thank you so much. That's a very important question and topic, and I thank you for planning on that next week, because we need the parental guidance, especially from the men perspective and the men direction, because every male child needs a parental guidance. in their life, especially our African men. And the African parent or a father or a male figure is very important to the child. Now, it's very important to note that mental health is not a respecter of person. Anyone can have mental issue. Educated, non-educated, rich, poor, from any background, black, white, any human being can be affected by a mental health issue. And the subject that we need to focus on for next week, and what you asked me to, what you'd like for me to ask the men to discuss, is the repeated pattern of the same issue or mental issue that makes them to go back into jail or to be arrested all the time. What can we do? Because they are, if the pattern is cut, because mental illness is not a permanent disease, it can be treated. If there is a repeated pattern, then we have a problem. Then that's what we call the impairment. Why are they going into, why do you find that our African American, our brothers, or our African people, they are going into jail back and forth, because of the same issue, because of the same condition? That's one thing that I would want to learn and know and hear from the men when they discuss next week. Now, I really pray, I pray that the cycle doesn't repeat, because studies have shown that once a child or a young person has had to face this issue, the cycle repeats, and it repeats on to from generation to generation, which we don't want to go into. Now, thank you so much for bringing thank you so much for bringing the subject of, I'm getting interrupted by the child. She's crawling down here. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for bringing the subject of the stakeholders who are the pastors, teachers, the ministers, the teachers. These are very key people. They play a very pivotal role in enabling the community, because guess what? We listen more to them. My child will tell me, "Mommy, my teacher didn't say that." So my child will be drawn into listening to the teacher more than me. My child goes to church and says, "Pastor so and so taught that, Mommy, we should not be lying." And young people have also grown to look at these key figures as role models, because the scripture says, "For whoever much is given, much is required from them." That means if these stakeholders who are, the key figures in our community, and I see some of them here, thank you so much for joining. If they are on board in understanding that mental health is real and it can affect anybody, and then we are in good position to tackle this issue, because once they get into the pulpit to preach, and I'm very glad that some of them have started adjusting and adopting into their lifestyle, knowing that we can have mental health cases in the community. We have them at church, we have them, and they are normal human beings. And if they continue, if they change the narrative of accepting and adjusting and starting to teach about it from the pulpit, then many community members will accept and embrace a lot of these people, a lot of family members, and love them and care for them, so that we can get rid of this issue that is becoming a stigma in our African culture or our African content. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally. Please say hello to that little child, and all our viewers are wishing the child well, and we appreciate the child participating in the discussion. And I think for the viewers, particularly the community leaders who are listening to this conversation, please, KDL is providing a platform for us to very openly, honestly, and very insightfully have a serious dialogue about this issue. So please feel free to reach out to us so that we can moderate the discussion for the betterment of our future. So I'm going to come finishing up there from London, our dear daughter, Nyareso. Next week, same time, the men will be here having a men talk. These are brothers, these are fathers, these are uncles, these are cousins, these are sons. What do you want to hear from them next week?
I would like to know how we can support them so that we can encourage a culture of talking, because I think that is the main issue with men. You know, just as Sally said at the beginning of this discussion, she mentioned that we teach our children to don't talk about, handle it and that's a lot. That is, even my own brother personally, there are times when he's been told, you need to be a man. And I think that has a lot of detrimental effects on mental health down the line. So how
Interrupted.
Go ahead, Neres, are you on? Okay.
So I think she got interrupted. I can add, I think to what she was saying, as growing up in an African cultural background, we teach men to be resilient. We teach men to be strong. Even when they are crying, if something is going on, we tell them, be a man, grow up, you can do this. And we forget that they are human beings. They are emotional, they are social. There's a psychological part of them that needs to be taken care of. So as parents, as leaders, as family members, we need to approach this with care and love, and discuss some of these issues. Be open, be friendly to them. One thing that we miss is wearing the shoe of the other person. I know it's very hard to wear the shoe of the other person, but should we turn the coin and say, me, Sally, if I were in the shoe of this person, what are they going through? Let's think about what they're going through. Let's imagine how they are feeling. They have lost a loved one, they have lost a child, they have lost work, they have lost a relationship, or if it's a woman, they are going through domestic violence. What could they be going through before we start condemning them? Before we start telling them to man up, to grow up, what can we do? Those are some of the things that we need to hear from men next week. How can we support them? How can you include us on board to discuss, even when you are at your lows? Men, sometimes they don't even show emotions. They don't cry. A loved one will die, and rarely will they cry, but they will be suffering inwardly. They will be tortured in themselves, and then they will withdraw. And that has a ripple effect. It will affect their family members, it will affect their children, it affects the community. All of a sudden, you see Dr. Kari was in the community, he's no longer in the community. He has lost a loved one and he has withdrawn. So how can we support them? How can they be receptive? How can they be open? How can they be educated to accept and acknowledge that these things are there? They have been there. These are some of the issues we cannot do without. It's how we handle them, how we approach them, how we perceive them. The perception, our own perception. Let us not act like we are islands If we act like we are islands, then we will not be able to solve this issue. We will not be able to help each other. We need to know that we are a community. We are a society. Our traditional African society has molded us and nurtured us to grow as a community. We are communal. We are not individualistic. Anything that affects one human being will affect all of us. We started this discussion that knowing that if we are not infected, we are actually affected. Guess what? Because we talk about it. We talk about it among ourselves, between ourselves. We hear something happening out there for somebody's child, somebody's family. We come home and we discuss it. So then how can we separate ourselves from mental health issues? Because we come home and it affects us. We talk about it and we say, hey, guess what? So and so's child, is this. So and so's family is going through this. We as a community, we need to approach it carefully, prayerfully, and with love and care. Then we can support each other without condemning them for what they are going through. Thank you very much, Dr. Kari. Back to you.
Thank you. You're making me emotional here, but thank you very much for your contribution. So we have Nyereso back on for a closing statement, and you are talking to the men who will come into the show next week. What would you like to hear them talk about?
I was cut off earlier, but I was just mentioning how men are, the rate of mental health issues among higher than women. And I think this is because men are not encouraged to talk about their feelings. And I mentioned personally, even my brother, there are very many times he's been told, be a man. But what does that really, what type of is that encouraging? They're taught to repress their feelings. They're taught not to talk about what they're going. That's not very helpful because that's why men have are more likely to commit suicide. They have higher suicide rates among men compared to women, higher use of alcohol, because those are other outlets, those are coping mechanisms that can be avoided if we encourage a culture of talking. So for the men that are coming on the show tomorrow, I would really like to know how we can encourage a culture of talking. And when I say we, I mean stakeholders, mental health enthusiasts, mental health professionals, and anybody else out there in the community who would like to help and support. How can we encourage that culture of talking among men, and especially African men?
As I can't add more, I think thank you for the contributions. I think that will mark the end of our show for today. It's been longer than expected, and I think in part because of the insightful contribution that has been brought forth by the participants. So as I end this, I want to thank our panelists. First, I want to thank Dr. Judy Wanyama. Unfortunately, due to technical problems, we had a back and forth, and I think she's watching this. So apologies on our behalf, and she's a regular contributor, and we will be seeing here again in future discussion. So thank you very much, Judy, and obviously Lori, who's not feeling very well. She's close to Judy at the moment. Sorry about that, and we're hoping to have you on the show again next time. So filling in the shoes for both, for Lori, Sally. Thank you, Sally. What you've done here is absolutely incredible. It's admirable. Thank you for your very insightful contributions, and whatever you do in the community. We don't tell you much, but what you're doing, we sincerely appreciate, and obviously we'd love to have you back on the show. And particularly for those ones who are working in the healthcare industry and the public health industry, the nurses, all these people in the community who are knowledgeable in this subject, we are encouraging you to come forth and have this very open-ended discussion. I think it's good for the community, for us to grow as a people. And then from London, our daughter, Nyereso, thank you so very much for sticking on. Unfortunately, we didn't have you last week. We apologize for doing that. You stuck on, and your contributions here, quite frankly, are admirable. And I think it says a lot particularly about our younger people. So our immigrants from Africa, whether it's in the UK or in Asia or here in America, pretty much the experiences you're going through are the same experiences. I think your perspectives here, I totally appreciate it, and would love to have you back on the show so that we have that comparative analysis of what you experience in Europe and what our sisters and brothers experience here in the US as well. So as I end here, I also want to thank Klo, Ben, Gutu Kebato, who is really running the show from behind the scenes. Thank you for sticking despite the hitches. Thank you for providing the forum for our community to engage. And in part, when you think about it, and I'm saying this directly to the African immigrants here in Minneapolis, in the UK, across the country, we, the immigrants, do not have a forum where we can openly discuss issues such as this. We all the time tune on to BBC, Fox News, CNN. We need to have a platform such as this so that we're able to very openly discuss some of these issues. And some of the frustrations that we see on the social media, on a subjective end, is understandable, but we really need to have a forum where we can objectively discuss matters such as we have done today. So again, we'll continue this conversation next week when we have men come on the show to have a men talk. Really very, very candid discussion. So if you have any thoughts, views on how we should proceed with this show and what you anticipate from the community experts, we would love to have your feedback so that we can grow together, not individually, but how we can grow together. One more time again from here on KDL TV, I want to thank you very much for being with us. We look forward to tuning in next week on Sunday. For you, Nyareso, take care of yourself, go to bed, have dinner. We'll see you soon again. And Sally, thank you. Take care of the little kid, and you at home. Thank you for having us on. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Ben, are we done?